A cold breeze swept through the quiet streets as the late evening descended into night. It was one of those moments where the world seemed to pause, holding its breath as the shadows stretched long under the flickering streetlights. The small neighborhood was silent except for the faint hum of distant traffic. On this dimly lit street, a young pregnant woman named Jasmine Walker trudged carefully home, one hand resting protectively over her growing belly. She had just finished a long day at work, her body aching, but her mind was focused on reaching the safety of her small apartment. Jasmine, at 29, had always been strong. She wasn't just a fighter in the literal sense. Life had taught her resilience from an early age. As a Black woman, she had faced her share of challenges, but her spirit had remained unbroken. Tonight, though, she was tired, so much so that she didn't hear the screeching tires approaching until it was too late. The car skidded to a sudden stop beside her, and a flashlight beam cut sharply through the dark, landing on her face. Blinded for a moment, Jasmine shielded her eyes and took an uncertain step back. A booming voice cut through the silence. "Hey, you. What are you doing out here at this hour?" It was Officer Thomas Cole, a man whose reputation echoed through every block of the city. For years, people whispered stories about him, a police officer with a mean streak and an unmistakable bias. Some called him aggressive, others outright cruel, but nobody dared to confront him directly. Officer Cole wore his uniform like armor, his badge as both a shield and a weapon. Jasmine tried to remain calm, raising her hands slightly, her voice steady but cautious. "I'm just walking home, officer. I live a few blocks away." Cole stepped out of his patrol car, his boots hitting the pavement with deliberate heaviness. The flashlight remained fixed on her face, its harsh glare making it hard to see him clearly. "You look suspicious to me," he sneered. "Why did you tell me what's really going on?" Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest. She knew better than to argue. Her mother had always told her to keep her head down, to comply, to be polite when faced with situations like this. But fear crept into her bones nonetheless. "I swear, officer, I'm just going home. Please. Do you have ID on you?" Cole barked, stepping closer. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached into her bag to retrieve her wallet. Cole's suspicious glare didn't waver. He was looking at her like she was guilty of something, as though simply existing on that street was a crime. When she finally held out her ID, he snatched it roughly, peering at it before tossing it back into her bag. "You don't belong around here," he muttered darkly. "I live here," Jasmine protested, her voice quivering but firm. Cole didn't want to hear it. In his eyes, she was just another face in a crowd he didn't trust, and he decided, then and there, that he wouldn't let her leave so easily. Without warning, he grabbed her arm, pulling her roughly toward his patrol car. Jasmine gasped, stumbling forward, a sharp jolt of pain surging through her body. "Stop," she cried. "You're hurting me. I'm pregnant." For a brief moment, the words seemed to register, but they weren't enough to stop him. Cole's expression darkened, a mix of anger and disdain etched across his face. "Don't play games with me," he spat. His grip tightened, the roughness of his actions completely disregarding her condition. Jasmine's breaths came faster, panic setting in as tears stung her eyes. She tried to pull back, but Cole was relentless, his force growing harsher by the second. The dark street seemed to close in around them, and for a moment, she felt utterly alone. "Please," she choked out. "I'm not doing anything wrong. Let me go." But Cole wasn't listening. The more she resisted, the more aggressive he became. Jasmine's back hit the side of the patrol car as her knees buckled slightly under her. She could feel her unborn baby shifting inside her, the pain in her abdomen becoming sharper with every movement. And then something changed. A voice, calm, firm, and unmistakably powerful. "What the hell do you think you're doing to my wife?" Cole froze, his head snapping up toward the direction of the voice. Jasmine, still clutching her belly, turned her head, and relief flooded her as a tall figure stepped out from the shadows. He was calm, but his presence was commanding, as though he'd appeared from nowhere, yet belonged perfectly to this moment. It was Marcus Walker, Jasmine's husband. To those who knew him, Marcus wasn't just another man. He carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that made people stop and listen. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his broad shoulders straight, and his gaze unwavering as it landed on Officer Cole. The streetlight caught the shine of something small pinned to his jacket, glinting faintly in the dark, the kind of insignia only worn by those with the highest authority. Marcus stepped forward, slow and deliberate, his sharp eyes never leaving Cole. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice low but deadly calm. Cole blinked, his grip loosening on Jasmine's arm. Who are you?" he stammered, his confidence faltering. Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked at Jasmine first, his expression softening as he gently reached for her, helping her stand upright. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his hand brushing her cheek. Jasmine nodded weakly, though the tears on her face told him everything he needed to know. When Marcus turned back to Cole, the calm softness in his eyes vanished. "Do you have any idea who you just laid hands on?" Cole opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. There was something unsettling about Marcus' presence, as though he knew something Cole didn't. A cold dread began to creep into Cole's stomach. This wasn't a man he could intimidate or ignore. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet, holding it up so Cole could see. The officer's face went pale as the truth hit him like a freight train. There, shining on Marcus's credentials, were the unmistakable letters, FBI. Cole took an involuntary step back, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. Marcus's voice was deadly calm as he spoke again. "You just assaulted a pregnant woman, my wife, and I'm going to make sure you answer for every second of it." The silence that followed was deafening. Cole's confidence had shattered completely, his arrogance reduced to nothing. He stumbled backward toward his patrol car, his hands trembling as he tried to come up with something, anything, to say. But Marcus wasn't done. "You don't get to walk away from this," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the dark like a knife. "Not anymore." The words hung heavily in the air as Officer Cole froze, his heart pounding, the weight of his actions sinking in. Jasmine leaned into Marcus, her body still trembling slightly, but her mind was clear. She knew that, whatever happened next, this moment had changed everything. And in that silent, empty street, one thing was certain. Officer Cole had no idea just how far this was about to go. The street seemed frozen in time as Marcus's words echoed, their weight settling like a heavy stone in the pit of Officer Cole's stomach. Jasmine felt Marcus's steady hand on her back, anchoring her as she tried to calm her racing heart. The cold night air did little to soothe her nerves, but for the first time since the confrontation began, she felt a glimmer of safety. Marcus had arrived just in time. Officer Cole's face was pale, his earlier bravado now replaced with fear and confusion. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected anyone to show up, let alone someone with authority far above his own. Cole had always walked a thin line, pushing his power to its limits because he believed no one would challenge him. He thought he could get away with it, he always had, but this time felt different. Marcus didn't take his eyes off Cole. The silence between them felt heavy, charged, and unrelenting. Jasmine watched as the officer shifted uncomfortably, trying to find words that wouldn't come. Finally, Cole managed to stammer out, "I didn't know, I thought." Marcus's expression hardened, and he stepped closer, his tone sharp but controlled. "You thought what? That you could lay hands on a pregnant woman just because you didn't like how she looked walking down the street?" His voice never rose, but every word struck like a blow. I didn't realize she..." Cole trailed off again, his eyes darting nervously between Marcus and Jasmine. "You didn't realize what?" Marcus shot back. "That she's someone's wife? That she's carrying a child? All that the law you claim to uphold doesn't allow you to treat people like this?" The street lamp buzzed faintly, its light flickering as though even it was struggling to bear witness to what had just happened. Cole swallowed hard, but Marcus didn't let up. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to an icy whisper that only Cole could hear. "I don't care who you think you are. You're done. Understand?" Cole flinched, the weight of Marcus's words settling over him. For the first time in a long time, the officer felt powerless. He gave a small, shaky nod, his hands still twitching nervously at his sides. Without another word, Marcus turned his back on him, dismissing him like a problem that had already been solved. Cole stumbled toward his patrol car, fumbling with the handle before climbing in and slamming the door shut. The engine roared to life, and with a screech of tires, he sped off into the night, leaving the empty street behind. Jasmine let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her body sagged slightly against Marcus as he gently wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "I've got you," he murmured softly. His voice, so calm and strong in front of Cole, softened now as he turned his full attention to her. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" Jasmine shook her head slowly, though the pain still lingered in her body. "I'll be okay," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was just so scared." Marcus cupped her face in his hands, his gaze searching hers. "You don't ever have to go through something like that alone," he said firmly. "I'm here. Always." Jasmine managed a weak smile, tears pooling in her eyes as the adrenaline began to fade. She knew Marcus meant every word. He wasn't just her husband, he was her rock, the person who always seemed to show up when she needed him most. As he helped her toward their car parked down the block, the tension of the moment began to shift. But inside, Jasmine couldn't shake the anger that still burned quietly in her chest. Why had this happened? Why had Officer Cole seen her and decided, without a second thought, that she was a threat? She hadn't done anything wrong, just walking home, minding her own business. Yet he had treated her like she didn't belong, like she had no right to exist peacefully in her own neighborhood. The drive home was quiet, the hum of the car filling the silence between them. Marcus kept glancing at Jasmine, his jaw set tight as he tried to keep his emotions in check. He'd been furious, angrier than he'd let show in front of Cole, but Marcus knew how to channel his anger. He'd dealt with men like Cole before, men who abused their power because they thought no one would hold them accountable. Marcus had seen it during his time in the bureau, and it never got any easier to stomach. When they finally pulled up to their apartment, Marcus helped Jasmine out of the car and guided her inside. The apartment was small but cozy, with soft lights spilling across the living room walls. Jasmine sank onto the couch, her body sinking into the cushions as exhaustion finally hit her. Marcus sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "Tell me everything," he said quietly, "from the moment he stopped you." Jasmine sighed, her voice trembling slightly as she recounted the events. "He just appeared out of nowhere," she said, shining that flashlight in my face like I'd done something wrong. I tried to tell him I was just walking home, but it didn't matter to him. It was like he'd already decided what kind of person I was the second he saw me. Marcus's expression darkened, his hand tightening around hers. He didn't interrupt, letting her speak until every detail was out. Jasmine noticed the way his jaw clenched when she mentioned how rough Cole had been, how he hadn't listened when she told him she was pregnant. Marcus was silent for a moment after she finished, his mind clearly turning over what needed to be done next. "This isn't over," he said finally, his voice calm but resolute. "Men like him don't get to walk away from this. Not anymore." Jasmine looked at him, concern flickering in her eyes. "What are you going to do?" Marcus met her gaze, his expression softening just a little. "I'm going to make sure he never does this to anyone else. I'll file a report. I'll talk to my contacts. Whatever it takes, Jasmine. I promise you, he won't get away with this." She nodded, trusting him completely, but part of her still felt uneasy. "Be careful, Marcus. Men like him, they don't go down quietly." Marcus gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "I know, but I also know he messed with the wrong people tonight." Jasmine managed a faint smile, leaning into him as she closed her eyes, the exhaustion finally taking over. Marcus held her close, his mind still racing. He knew that Officer Cole wouldn't let this go easily. Men like him never did. But Marcus had something Cole didn't, the truth on his side, and a reason to fight. As the apartment grew silent, the events of the night hung heavily in the air. Outside, the city carried on as usual, unaware of the storm that had just begun to brew. Marcus knew this was just the beginning, and he was ready for whatever came next. But for now, he held his wife close, promising silently that he would protect her, no matter what it took. What Marcus didn't know, though, was that the confrontation with Officer Cole was only the tip of something much larger. What lay ahead was more than a single corrupt officer. It was a system, deeply ingrained, and ready to push back. The following morning, the soft rays of sunlight crept through the blinds, casting thin lines across the apartment walls. Jasmine woke to find Marcus already dressed, pacing quietly in the living room with his phone in hand. His sharp suit matched his serious expression, and she could tell he hadn't slept much. His quiet voice drifted toward her as he spoke, though she couldn't make out the words. Sitting up slowly, Jasmine rubbed her belly, feeling the faint flutter of her baby moving. It was comforting, even if her body still ached from the night before. The memory of Officer Cole's rough hands and cold glare lingered like a bruise on her heart. She tried to push it aside, but every time she closed her eyes, she was back on that dark street, afraid and alone. Marcus ended his call, slipping his phone into his pocket before walking over to her. "You're awake," he said softly, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," Jasmine admitted, "but better now that you're here." She looked at him carefully. "Who were you talking to?" Marcus sighed, sitting down beside her. "Some people I trust at the bureau. I'm filing an official complaint against Cole today. I also asked a friend to look into his record. I have a feeling this isn't the first time he's pulled something like this." Jasmine swallowed hard, worry flickering in her eyes. "Do you think they'll actually do something? I mean, he's been getting away with this for so long." Marcus's jaw tightened. "They'll have to. I won't let this disappear." His tone was firm, but Jasmine could sense the frustration beneath it. Marcus wasn't naive. He knew how these things worked. A complaint could be filed, an investigation might be opened, but systems like this didn't change overnight. Men like Officer Cole thrived on the fact that accountability was rare, especially in neighborhoods like theirs. Later that day, Marcus dropped Jasmine off at her mother's house to rest while he headed to the precinct. As he approached the imposing building, his mind replayed everything that had happened. Marcus had always known the fine line between justice and corruption. He'd spent years navigating it as an FBI agent, but seeing his wife on the receiving end of such mistreatment had ignited a fire in him he hadn't felt in years. Inside the station, Officer Cole was sitting at his desk, staring blankly at a computer screen. The moment he saw Marcus stride through the doors, his expression stiffened, his shoulders squaring defensively. Cole's colleagues glanced curiously between the two men, sensing the tension in the room. "Walker," Cole muttered, standing up as Marcus approached. "What are you doing here?" Marcus stopped a few feet away, his voice calm but pointed. "I'm here to file a formal complaint against you. Last night, you assaulted my wife, a pregnant woman, for no reason." Cole scoffed, his lips curling into a defensive smirk. "Assault? That's a bit dramatic. I was doing my job." "Your job?" Marcus's voice sharpened. "Your job doesn't give you the right to harass innocent people, let alone lay your hands on them. My wife did nothing wrong, and you know it." "Look, I didn't know she was your wife," Cole shot back, his tone laced with irritation. "I thought she was up to something." Marcus stepped closer, his presence towering over Cole. "You thought? What gave you that impression? The fact that she was walking while black?" Cole's face reddened, but he didn't respond. Around the room, other officers pretended to focus on their work, though they clearly heard every word. Marcus didn't care. He wanted them all to hear. "I've already made some calls," Marcus continued, his voice steady. "There's going to be an investigation into your behavior, not just last night, but every incident that's been swept under the rug. If you have skeletons in your closet, Officer Cole, now's the time to worry." Cole's smirk faltered, replaced by an uneasy scowl. Marcus turned and walked to the front desk, ignoring the venomous glare burning into his back. While Marcus filed the report, Cole stormed into the back room, slamming his fists onto a table. He wasn't used to being challenged like this. To him, Marcus was just another man trying to stir up trouble, a thorn in his side that needed to be handled. Pulling out his phone, Cole scrolled through his contacts, his mind racing. He had allies in places people didn't expect, and if Marcus wanted a fight, he'd get one. Meanwhile, at Jasmine's mother's house, the atmosphere was calmer, but her mind was far from at ease. Her mother, a strong woman with streaks of grey in her curly hair, watched her daughter with concern as she brought her a cup of tea. "Marcus told me what happened," she said quietly, sitting across from Jasmine. "That man is dangerous, Jasmine. You know that, right?" Jasmine nodded, staring into her tea. "I know, but what else can we do? We can't just let him get away with it." Her mother sighed. "I just don't want this to turn into something bigger. Men like him, they don't stop until someone makes them. And Marcus, he's going to push until the truth comes out, no matter the cost." Jasmine looked up, her eyes soft. "That's who he is. Mom, he's fighting for me, for us, for everyone else who's been hurt and ignored." Her mother reached over, gently squeezing her hand. "Then we'll fight with him, no matter what comes." Back at the precinct, Marcus finished his complaint and returned to his car, his phone buzzing as he slid behind the wheel. It was his friend from the bureau. "Marcus, I found something," the voice said over the line, low and serious. "Cole's record isn't clean, far from it. There are other complaints against him, but they've been buried. Every time someone tries to dig into his history, it disappears." Marcus's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Who's protecting him?" "That's the thing," the voice continued. "It's not just one person. Cole's part of something bigger, a network of officers who cover for each other. If you're going after him, you need to be careful. You're stepping on a lot of toes." Marcus's stomach turned, but he didn't hesitate. "Send me everything you have. I don't care how far this goes. He's not walking away from this." The line went dead, and Marcus stared out the windshield, his mind racing. He thought about Jasmine, about the fear in her eyes last night, and he knew there was no turning back. Whatever Cole was part of, Marcus will expose it. But deep down, he also knew this fight was about to get a lot more dangerous than he'd anticipated. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the city, Jasmine sat quietly in her mother's living room, a growing unease settling in her chest. Something about the night before felt bigger than just one bad officer. It was a crack in a foundation that went deeper than she could see, and she couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The city seemed quieter that night, as though it knew something was about to erupt beneath its surface. Jasmine sat on the couch, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of her teacup as Marcus paced near the window. He'd been on edge since his friend from the bureau had called, and every few minutes he'd check his phone as if waiting for more bad news. Jasmine watched him carefully, her voice soft when she finally spoke. "Marcus, what did your friend find?" Marcus stopped pacing, running a hand over his jaw as he turned to face her. "It's worse than I thought," he admitted, his voice low but steady. "Cole isn't just a bad officer. He's part of a group that protects men like him. It's like a shadow network within the department, covering up misconduct, hiding reports, and anyone who tries to speak out gets pushed out or silenced." Jasmine's heart sank. How is that even possible? Doesn't anyone see what's happening? "They see it," Marcus said, sitting down beside her. "But seeing and doing something about it are two different things. Most people who know the truth are too afraid to act." He took her hand in his, holding it gently. "But I'm not afraid, Jasmine. I'm going to expose every last one of them." She could hear the determination in his voice, but with it came a chilling weight. Marcus wasn't just fighting for her anymore. He was walking into something much bigger. "Marcus, what if they come after you? You don't know what these men are capable of." Marcus's expression softened as he looked at her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I know the risks, but I also know what's at stake if we do nothing. If we let Cole and his people get away with this, they'll keep hurting others. I can't live with that, and I won't let anyone else suffer the way you did." Jasmine nodded, though worry still lingered in her eyes. She trusted Marcus with everything, but this wasn't a battle with clear lines. It was messy, dangerous, and unpredictable. The following day, Marcus started pulling together every shred of evidence he could find. He called in favors from his contacts at the Bureau, combed through case files, and tracked down names tied to Officer Cole. What he uncovered painted a dark picture: reports of excessive force, harassment, and misconduct buried under layers of red tape. Each file was like a thread unraveling something far larger than one man's crimes. At the same time, Officer Cole was growing increasingly uneasy. Marcus's investigation had stirred whispers at the precinct, and some of his colleagues had begun to distance themselves from him. Sitting alone in his car one afternoon, Cole dialed a number, his hands trembling slightly. "They're looking into me," he muttered when the call was answered. "That Walker guy, the FBI agent, he's digging too deep." A low voice on the other end replied calmly, "Then you need to handle it quickly. We can't afford for this to blow up." Cole's jaw clenched as he gripped the steering wheel tighter. "He's not backing down. I don't know how to stop him." The voice paused for a moment, then said coldly, "Then send a message. Make him understand what happens to people who don't know their place." Cole's stomach turned, but he nodded silently, ending the call. He knew what that meant. A warning, something that would make Marcus think twice about pushing further. But even as Cole started the car, a knot of unease formed in his chest. This wasn't just about protecting himself anymore. It was about protecting an entire system that had kept him untouchable for years, and he couldn't let Marcus take it all apart. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in his home office, poring over documents scattered across the desk. His phone buzzed, breaking his focus, and he answered quickly. It was his friend from the Bureau again. "Marcus," the voice said urgently, "I just got word that Cole knows what you're up to. Be careful, he's desperate, and desperate men do dangerous things." Marcus's pulse quickened, though his voice remained calm. "I knew this wouldn't be easy." "Listen," his friend continued, "I can help you as much as I can, but you're stepping into dangerous territory. There are people in high places who don't want this coming out." Marcus looked at the stack of evidence in front of him. "That's exactly why I'm not stopping." As he hung up the phone, a faint sound outside caught his attention. He stood up, peering through the window into the growing darkness. At first, everything looked normal. The quiet street, lit only by street lamps, the faint hum of distant traffic, but something felt off. Marcus's instincts kicked in, and he stepped toward the door just as a loud thud echoed against it. Jasmine, who had been resting in the bedroom, called out, "Marcus, what was that?" "Stay there," Marcus called back, his voice steady but urgent. He unlocked the door and opened it slowly, only to find a small box sitting on the doorstep. There was no note, no sign of who had left it. Marcus glanced up and down the street but saw nothing. Picking up the box carefully, he carried it inside and set it on the table. Jasmine appeared in the doorway, worry written across her face. "What is that?" "I don't know," Marcus muttered, opening the lid. Inside was a single object, a broken picture frame. The photo inside was one of Marcus and Jasmine, taken years ago when they first got married. A deep crack split the glass, right through their smiling faces. Jasmine's face went pale. "Marcus." "It's a warning," Marcus said quietly, his voice hard. He clenched his fists, his anger bubbling beneath the surface. "They're trying to scare us. But they made a mistake. What do you mean? Jasmine asked, her voice trembling. Marcus looked up at her, his eyes sharp and unwavering. They think this will stop me, but all they've done is prove I'm getting too close. And now I know I'm on the right track. Jasmine's heart pounded as she stepped closer, her hand finding his. You're not doing this alone, Marcus. Whatever happens, we're in this together. Marcus nodded, though his mind was already spinning. He knew the stakes had just been raised. Whoever Cole was protecting was powerful, and they were willing to go to dangerous lengths to keep the truth hidden. But Marcus had never backed down from a fight, and he wasn't about to start now. As the night stretched on, the apartment grew quieter, but the weight of the warning lingered. Outside, unseen eyes watched from the shadows, waiting, planning their next move. Marcus knew the battle ahead would push him to his limits, but he also knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't stop until the truth was out, no matter what it cost him. The apartment was quiet, almost unnervingly so, as Marcus stared at the broken photo frame on the table. The crack through their faces felt like a cruel metaphor. Whoever had sent it wanted to fracture their peace, to rattle him into silence. But Marcus wasn't the kind of man to fold under pressure. If anything, the warning only sharpened his resolve. Jasmine sat across from him, her expression pale but determined as she sipped from a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Do you think they're watching us? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus's gaze shifted to the window, where the city lights flickered against the dark night. Probably, he admitted. They're trying to intimidate us, Jasmine, but they don't know me. He glanced back at her, his eyes steady. I won't stop. Jasmine nodded, though a chill ran through her. She trusted Marcus more than anyone, but this wasn't just about exposing Officer Cole anymore, it was bigger. They were fighting something invisible yet everywhere, like smoke in a room with no windows. The next morning, Marcus's phone buzzed while he sat at his desk, a new stack of files spread out in front of him. The caller ID flashed his friend's name, Derek from the bureau. Marcus, Derek said, his voice clipped. You're not going to believe this. Marcus sat up straight. What is it? They fast-tracked an internal review on Cole, Derek explained. The pressure you've been putting on them is working, but here's the catch. Someone's already moved to seal most of his file. Marcus frowned, his mind racing. What do you mean seal it? Who has the authority to do that? That's what I'm trying to figure out, Derek replied. Someone high up is pulling strings to protect him. And it's not just Cole. They're connected to more officers, more cases. This whole thing goes deeper than we thought. Marcus's blood ran cold. How deep? Derek hesitated, and then his voice lowered. There's a name that keeps popping up. Someone in the department's upper ranks. Captain James Hollis. You remember him? Marcus's jaw tightened. He did remember Hollis. Years ago, when Marcus was still fresh at the bureau, Hollis' name had come up in quiet conversations about corruption and cover-ups, but nothing was ever proven. The man was untouchable, operating behind a wall of influence that few dared to challenge. What's his connection to Cole? Marcus asked, his voice hard. We don't have the full picture yet, Derek said. But if Hollis is involved, this isn't just about dirty cops. It's about a system, one designed to bury people like you when they get too close. Marcus exhaled slowly, his mind racing with possibilities. Hollis was powerful, careful, and ruthless when it came to protecting his interests. If Hollis was shielding Cole, then Marcus knew the stakes were far higher than he'd thought. He couldn't just expose Cole anymore. He'd have to bring down the entire network. That afternoon, Marcus picked Jasmine up from her mother's house. She noticed his tight grip on the steering wheel, the way his eyes flickered to the rearview mirror more often than usual. What's wrong? She asked softly, her gaze searching his face. Things are escalating, Marcus admitted, not sugarcoating it. Cole's being protected by someone bigger. A captain named Hollis. I've dealt with him before. He's dangerous, Jasmine. Jasmine's fingers tightened instinctively on her seatbelt. If he's that powerful, shouldn't you? I'm not backing down, Marcus cut in, though his tone wasn't sharp, it was resolute. I just need to be smart. I need evidence, something they can't bury or deny. Jasmine nodded slowly, though the worry was clear in her eyes. Just promise me you'll be careful. I will, Marcus said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. I promise. But promises in situations like this were fragile things. Later that evening, as Marcus sat in his home office, poring through a string of old case files, his phone buzzed again. It was Derek, and this time, his voice was low and urgent. Marcus, we found something you need to see. Meet me tonight, 10 p.m., parking garage on 5th, level 3. Marcus frowned, sitting up. Why there? What's going on? It's safer if we talk in person, Derek replied. Trust me. I've got something that changes everything. The line went dead, and Marcus stared at the phone, his mind now racing. Derek had never sounded like that before, nervous, cautious, almost scared. Marcus knew he couldn't ignore it. He grabbed his jacket and turned to Jasmine, who was in the living room. I have to meet Derek, he said. He found something big. Jasmine stood, her eyes wide. Marcus, are you sure this is safe? What if it's a trap? It's not a trap, Marcus reassured her, though a knot of unease twisted in his stomach. Derek's on our side, but I'll be careful, I promise. Jasmine stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him tightly. Please come back safe, she whispered. Marcus kissed her forehead and lingered for a moment before stepping out into the night. The city felt colder than usual as he drove toward the meeting place. The streets seemed darker, the shadows longer, as though the world itself was bracing for what came next. When he pulled into the parking garage, the air inside was stale and heavy, the silence broken only by the faint echo of his shoes on the concrete. The garage was nearly empty, save for a few abandoned cars scattered on the lower levels. Marcus made his way to level 3, his senses sharp as he scanned his surroundings. The headlights of Derek's car came into view, parked in the far corner. Marcus approached cautiously, noticing Derek standing outside, pacing slightly as he checked his phone. Derek, Marcus called out, his voice low but firm. Derek looked up quickly, his expression tense. Marcus, he said, waving him over. You need to see this. I found records, evidence Hollis has been running this network for years. It's not just Cole. There are others, dozens of them, and... A loud screech of tires cut him off, echoing through the garage like a gunshot. Both men turned toward the sound as a black SUV sped up the ramp, its headlights blinding in the dim space. Marcus instinctively stepped in front of Derek, his hand reaching for his phone. Run, Marcus shouted. The SUV barreled toward them, its engine roaring as Derek stumbled back. The car swerved at the last second, tires screeching as it missed them by inches and sped down the ramp again. Marcus grabbed Derek's arm, pulling him toward cover behind a pillar. What the hell is happening? Derek gasped, his chest heaving. They're sending a message, Marcus growled, his mind racing. He peered around the corner, but the SUV had vanished into the lower levels. The silence returned, heavier this time, like a threat hanging in the air. Derek looked at Marcus, fear in his eyes. They know we're close. Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. And that's why we can't stop now. But even as he said the words, Marcus knew they were playing a dangerous game. Whoever was behind, this wasn't just watching anymore, they were striking back. And as Marcus stood there, listening to the distant hum of the city outside, he realized the storm they'd stepped into was about to get much worse. The echo of the SUV's tires still lingered in the concrete parking garage, vibrating in Marcus's chest like a distant tremor. Derek leaned against the pillar, still catching his breath, his face pale under the dim lights. Marcus peered around cautiously, his instincts sharp as ever. The SUV was gone for now, but Marcus knew they'd made their message clear, stop, or there would be consequences. We can't stay here, Marcus muttered, his voice low and urgent. They'll come back. Derek nodded shakily, pulling out a manila envelope from his jacket. This is it, everything I found. He handed the file to Marcus, his fingers trembling. Evidence of payoffs, false reports, missing complaints. Hollis isn't just protecting Cole, he's orchestrating the entire operation. It's a ring, Marcus. They cover for each other, bury cases, and intimidate anyone who gets too close. It's all in here. Marcus stared at the envelope, feeling the weight of it in his hands. This wasn't just pieces of a puzzle anymore. This was the map to the entire structure, a blueprint of corruption. If we take this public, they'll come after you harder, Derek interrupted, his voice cracking. You, Jasmine, everyone you care about. Marcus, these men don't just lose. They'll tear your life apart. Marcus's gaze hardened, his resolve unwavering. Then they picked the wrong person to mess with. He tucked the envelope securely under his jacket and glanced toward Derek. You need to get out of here. Lay low for a while. Derek hesitated. What about you? I'll be fine, Marcus said, though his mind was already spinning. He needed a plan, one that would put this evidence where no one could touch it and ensure these men couldn't bury it again. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he instinctively checked it. It was a text from Jasmine. Where are you? You okay? He quickly typed a response. I'm fine. Home soon. Love you. The drive back felt longer than usual, every car and shadow along the road an object of suspicion. By the time Marcus pulled into his apartment complex, the knot in his stomach had tightened. He parked carefully, scanning his surroundings before making his way inside. The elevator ride felt suffocating, the quiet humming against his ears as the floors ticked upward. When he entered the apartment, Jasmine was waiting by the door, her expression a mix of worry and relief. Marcus. He set his bag down, pulling her gently into his arms. I'm okay, he whispered, feeling her tension melt slightly against him. Jasmine pulled back to look at him, searching his face. What happened? Marcus sighed, his voice low. Derek found everything. We have proof, names, cases, and payoffs. But Hollis knows we're close. They tried to run us off the road tonight. Jasmine's breath hitched. What? Marcus, they're getting more dangerous. This is escalating. I know, Marcus admitted, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. But that just means we're hitting a nerve. If we don't stop them now, they'll keep doing this to other people. I can't let that happen. Jasmine nodded slowly, though her worry didn't fade. So what's next? Marcus opened his jacket, pulling out the manila envelope. We can't hold on to this. It needs to go somewhere safe, somewhere Hollis and his people can't reach. Jasmine watched him carefully. Who can you trust with it? Marcus paused for a moment, thinking. He knew the risks of handing over the file. Too many people could be compromised. Too many systems could fail. Then an idea struck him. I know someone. A journalist I worked with years ago. She's good, independent, relentless, and not afraid to dig. If anyone can bring this to light, it's her. Jasmine exhaled, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. Then we get it to her. Marcus nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in around them. Hollis and his network weren't just dangerous, they were meticulous. Marcus knew they would strike again, harder this time, and he couldn't let his guard down for even a second. Later that night, as Marcus sat at his desk double-checking the files, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He stared at it for a moment before answering. Hello. The line was silent for a second, and then a distorted voice crackled through. You're playing a dangerous game, Walker. Marcus's grip on the phone tightened. Who is this? You think you can bring us down? You think a file changes anything? You're already too late. The call went dead. Marcus lowered the phone slowly, his pulse quickening. A sick feeling settled in his stomach as he turned back to the envelope, flipping through the documents again. That's when he noticed something, a file out of place, one he hadn't examined closely before. His eyes narrowed as he pulled it out, scanning the details. It wasn't about Hollis or Cole. It was about him. Marcus froze, his heart pounding. The file detailed his career, his assignments, his family. There were surveillance notes, dates, locations, and even references to Jasmine. He flipped to the final page and saw a photograph of his apartment building taken from across the street. They had been watching him. Marcus's stomach dropped as he shot up from his chair, racing to the window. Peering out into the dark street below, he scanned the parked cars and dim corners, but nothing stood out. Still, he knew what this meant. Hollis and his people weren't just fighting back. They were steps ahead, and now they were coming for Marcus personally. Jasmine appeared in the doorway, her brow furrowed. "Marcus, what's wrong?" He turned to her, carefully hiding the file from view. "Nothing," he said quickly, forcing calm into his voice. "It's just, we need to leave tomorrow. We'll get the file to my contact, and then we'll figure out what to do next." Jasmine studied him for a long moment, sensing there was more he wasn't telling her. "You're sure everything's okay?" Marcus forced a small smile, walking over to wrap his arms around her. "I promise I've got this under control." But as he held her close, Marcus's mind raced. The game had changed. Hollis's network was vast, and now they were coming for his family. Marcus had fought dangerous men before, but this time the cost felt greater than ever. One wrong move could shatter everything. And as the dark street outside remained silent, unseen eyes lingered, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Marcus knew the clock was ticking, and if he didn't move fast, they'd take everything he loved. The night felt heavier than it should have as Marcus stood by the window, staring out into the quiet street below. The photograph of his apartment building still burned in his mind, a reminder that Hollis and his network were always watching, always waiting. Jasmine had finally drifted off to sleep in the bedroom, but Marcus couldn't rest. Every part of him was wired, his thoughts moving too quickly as he weighed the next steps. He knew they couldn't stay here much longer. Tomorrow, he would meet his journalist contact and hand over the file. It was the only way to make sure the truth came out. The system might be corrupted, but once the public knew what Hollis and his men were hiding, it would be impossible for them to bury it again. That hope was the only thing keeping Marcus grounded. Morning arrived quietly, sunlight slipping through the blinds like an uninvited guest. Jasmine woke to find Marcus already dressed, packing a small bag. She sat up slowly, her voice soft. "You didn't sleep, did you?" "I'll sleep when this is over," Marcus said, turning to offer her a tired smile. "We have to go. I'm meeting Leela, the journalist, in an hour." Jasmine nodded, climbing out of bed to get ready. Her movements were slower these days, the weight of her pregnancy catching up with her, but her mind was sharp, focused. She knew what was at stake, and she trusted Marcus to see it through. An hour later, they were on the road. The city seemed different in the daylight, its busy streets and honking cars a stark contrast to the silence of the night before. Marcus kept one eye on the rearview mirror as he drove, his senses sharp for any sign they were being followed. But so far, nothing felt out of place. They pulled into a small coffee shop on the edge of downtown, one Marcus had chosen carefully for its anonymity. Lila was already there, seated in the far corner with a laptop open and a steaming cup of coffee in front of her. She looked up when Marcus and Jasmine entered, her expression serious but welcoming. "Marcus," she said, standing to greet him with a firm handshake. "It's been a while." "Too long," Marcus replied, his voice calm but tight. "This is my wife, Jasmine." Leela nodded kindly toward Jasmine. "You're a brave woman." Jasmine offered a small smile. "I'm just here to make sure the truth comes out." They sat down, and Marcus pulled the manila envelope from his bag, sliding it across the table to Leela. "Everything's in here. Payoffs, false reports, buried cases. It all leads back to Hollis." Leila's expression hardened as she flipped through the documents, her eyes narrowing at the evidence in front of her. "This is big," she murmured, almost to herself. "Hollis has been untouchable for years, but with this, We can make noise. Enough noise that no one can ignore it. Marcus nodded. That's the goal. I need you to publish it. Get it out before they can move to bury it again. Leela looked up at him, determination burning in her gaze. I'll get this out, I promise. But Marcus, once this hits the public, they're going to come after you harder. You need to be ready for that. I've been ready since the moment this started, Marcus said quietly. Just do what you do best. Leela nodded and tucked the envelope into her bag, standing up. I'll get to work on this right away. You two stay safe. As she left the coffee shop, Marcus watched her disappear into the crowd outside. For the first time in days, he felt a small weight lift from his shoulders. The file was no longer in his hands. It was out of his control, and that was a good thing. Now, all they could do was wait. The drive home was quiet. Jasmine rested her head against the window, her eyes closed, while Marcus kept his focus on the road. But just as they turned onto their street, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down and saw Derek's name on the screen. His stomach tightened as he answered. Derek. Marcus, where are you? Derek's voice was tense, urgent. Something happened. I just got word that Hollis knows the file's out. They're moving fast. You need to get out of there. Marcus's heart pounded as he glanced at Jasmine. We're almost home. What do you mean they're moving? I mean Hollis isn't waiting around for the fallout, Derek replied sharply. He's panicking. They're tying up loose ends. You need to disappear now. Marcus didn't hesitate. We're not going home. I'll call you once we're safe. Jasmine opened her eyes, sensing the shift in his tone. What's wrong? Marcus tightened his grip on the wheel, turning the car away from their building. Hollis knows. Derek says they're tying up loose ends. We can't go back. Jasmine's face paled, but she didn't argue. Where are we going? Somewhere safe, Marcus replied, though he wasn't entirely sure where that was yet. He drove without a clear destination, taking side streets and doubling back to ensure they weren't being followed. Eventually, they ended up in a small motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place no one would think to look for them. Marcus checked them in under a false name and guided Jasmine into the room, locking the door tightly behind them. The hours stretched on slowly. Marcus kept the blinds closed and his phone nearby, waiting for any updates. Jasmine sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting on her belly, her expression tired but calm. Do you think she'll get the story out? She asked quietly. She will, Marcus said with certainty. Leela's good. And once it's out, they won't be able to hide anymore. As the day turned to night, Marcus's phone finally buzzed again. This time, it was a news alert. He opened the link and watched as the headline flashed across the screen. Widespread corruption in police department exposed. Captain James Hollis under investigation. The article was there, clear and damning. Leela had done it. Marcus exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest finally loosening. It's out, he murmured, turning the phone to show Jasmine. She read the headline, tears welling in her eyes. We did it, she whispered, her voice trembling. Marcus, we did it. It's just the beginning, Marcus replied softly, but it's enough to bring them down. The fallout was swift. Within hours, media outlets across the city picked up the story, and public outrage spread like wildfire. Hollis was suspended pending investigation, and more officers tied to the network began to be named. Officer Cole was arrested, his face plastered across the news, his crimes no longer hidden behind a badge. Marcus sat beside Jasmine, holding her hand as they watched it all unfold. The fight hadn't been easy, and the scars it left would take time to heal. But for the first time in a long time, they felt hope, a hope that the truth had finally seen the light of day. Jasmine leaned her head against Marcus's shoulder, her voice soft. Our baby will be born into a better world because of you. Marcus kissed the top of her head, his heart full. Because of us. Outside, the night stretched on, quieter than before, but this time it felt different. The shadows were lifting, and for Marcus and Jasmine, The future finally felt like it belonged to them again.